Hello, everyone. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar, Modern Workplace SaaS Risk. My name is Tan Nguyen. I'm co-founder and CEO of Detexian. And joining me today is my co-founder and CTO, Adrian Kiddo. Detexian is a Melbourne security startup focusing on security and compliance for major SaaS platforms such as Office 365, G Suite, Salesforce, and the like. As more businesses adopt SaaS, it's harder to keep track of who's got access privileges in which SaaS apps and how securely users interact with sensitive data. And these blind spots are particularly pronounced amongst modern workplaces. So the agenda for today will be a panel sharing followed by a Q&A session. At any point in time, feel free to submit your questions on the Q&A panel by clicking on the Q&A button. So let's begin. Our panelists today are prominent executives from three well-known modern workplaces: IAG, the largest insurance group in Australia; PageUp, a global talent management software company; and finally, CultureAmp, a global employee engagement software company and an Australian unicorn. Welcome. I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves in a bit. I'm going to start first with Damian Fasciani, Director of Technology at CultureAmp. Damian is the technologist at heart and one of our technical advisory board members. Damian, what does it mean for you to be a director of a culture-first organization, as CultureAmp identifies itself as?
Well, it's both an honor and a privilege to work for a business like CultureAmp. The truth is I was chasing a job there for 2 years prior to landing the role as Director of Technology. They encompass two big passions of mine, being people and tech. And when you bring those two attributes together, a business can do amazing things. So I'm genuinely brought into and believe in our vision, which is to build a better place of work for the world and to impact the lives of 100 million people through our platform and putting people first.
Awesome. Great to hear. Hey, Ashish. Previously, you were Cloud Security Practice Lead at Versant and now Head of Security and Compliance at PageUp, and a well-known cloud podcast host. If you haven't had a virtual coffee with Ashish, the audience on LinkedIn Live, you miss out on a good show. Ashish, PageUp itself delivers and consumes a number of SaaS offerings. So as the head of security and compliance, how does this impact your role?
So a great question. And I think, thank you. I want to start by saying thank you for having me over here. I think with other panelists as well, so super awesome. I think for me, coming from a different background, PageUp being a global company, the risk challenges are obviously global, but at the same time, the challenges are a bit more shared as well. The same way, we are a multi-cloud environment, and we obviously being a SaaS service ourselves, we share a lot of third-party risk with not just with our customers, but also with the services that we consume ourselves. So from that risk perspective, SaaS is one of the third parties that we definitely are keeping top of mind, not just from a contractual perspective, but also from a security perspective, especially when you have examples like Cambridge Analytica floating around in the world. It definitely makes you wonder, hey, who's looking after our SaaS again? So yeah, that's definitely been the transition. And thank you for the shout out for the podcast as well. That's my outside of 9 to 5. 9 to 5 is what I do, head of security, but outside of 9 to 5 is the Cloud Security podcast. Thanks.
Can't be missed. Ian Cameron, Executive Manager, Cybersecurity, Governance, and Strategy. It's a very powerful title, Ian. Ian has a long cybersecurity career working for multiple regulated entities. Ian, you've seen the transition from on-prem to SaaS happen. How has the role of cybersecurity governance had to change with this transition?
Thanks, Tan. I mean, and certainly it's been an interesting challenge moving from a very traditional on-premises footprint to an increasingly cloud-based business. Governance has had to adapt with that. We're now finding that as a regulated organization, that we have to adapt to I suppose, a posture of continuous assurance, the ability to just continually look at our risk posture. Because risk isn't static. We can't rely on on simple methods like one-off assessments or questionnaires. So governance needs to adapt to become more agile, more dynamic. So that means looking at the ability to do ongoing and continuous monitoring and assurance of our risk profile in real time, and being able to respond quickly to any emerging risks.
So Ian, I'm guessing IAG obviously has a pretty significant technology footprint. Can you tell me about the technologies that you use in IAG and what works and what doesn't for IAG as an organization?
Sure. I mean, with the traditional infrastructure as a service platforms, we have a strong partnership with Amazon, but also a growing footprint with Azure, and only just starting to look at Google Cloud Services. And then on top of that, we also have the usual plethora of enterprise software as a service platforms. For example, in our stable, we have Salesforce, ServiceNow, and then also Office 365. But then we also have a portion of our population using SaaS solutions such as Slack and Trello. There's a little bit of Atlassian in the cloud. And then we've got a growing number of small SaaS services that we use or subscribe to, things like Miro. What's also of concern to us is that we also have a number of subsidiaries that are also operating more as born in the cloud type businesses that are also using products like Xero, for example. So for us, the real challenge is that's a lot of diversity. That's a lot of different SaaS platforms. And each of them have their own unique security models, their own unique ways of managing identity and managing access. So our world is getting complex, having to understand how security is managed in each of those SaaS platforms, and then being able to roll that up and provide a view on how we're managing the risk, and also being able to provide that assurance to our regulators and also our customers that any of the sensitive and critical data that we're hosting in these different SaaS solutions is appropriately secured.
Yeah, that sounds like a very diverse technology footprint. You touched on there about the born in the cloud type organizations, and I'm going to move across to ask Damian the next question, because I know that Culture Amp is very proudly born in the cloud. With a multinational workforce such as Culture Amp and obviously a SaaS first philosophy, can you tell me about some of the successes of technology in your company?
Yeah, absolutely. Culture Amp is now 10 years old, and you're right, we were born in the cloud. So we have no, I guess, legacy technology or on-prem technology. And I think one of the biggest advantages to being born in the cloud, or one of the things that have really helped Culture Amp, is the organic adoption of SaaS technology has helped the company grow at scale and move at considerable pace, particularly in the last 4 to 5 years, where Culture Amp has enjoyed international growth, top of funnel growth from a customer perspective, but also operationally, internally within the organization as well. The SaaS-based technology has granted a level of autonomy to teams to be able to iterate on how they work, make decisions on how they work, and cross-functionally come together, or for all different types of initiatives, whether they're product-based or internal operations-based. So I think they're the biggest advantages that we've had.
Thank you very much for that. And now that leads us to Ashish. With a cloud consulting and security background such as yours, you've seen a lot of security technologies. What technologies have you seen to be effective across a hybrid environment, either like PageUp currently or also previously in other organizations?
Sure. I want to call it out as well. And it sounds like it's a good panel for people who are in the cloud and obviously have carried over from cloud. So we're definitely talking about a hybrid world as well for some of us, and probably some of the listeners as well. I definitely find the first step when anyone would ask me this question, I always say, like, you can't protect what you can't see. So asset register, probably the most CMDB asset register. You'll be surprised how many times I've had the conversation and people still say it's a spreadsheet. And you almost think that 21st century, why is an asset register a spreadsheet when Amazon, Azure, all these providers give you like an API to kind of talk to them and have a realistic picture. Once you kind of have that, and then you're looking at, okay, where's my data stored, or identity, as Ian mentioned earlier, I definitely kind of find those kind of solutions start becoming more important. And as you start adding more identity and product-wise goes, you're going, okay, I've got a few options here. I can either create a product or I can get an existing one, which just kind of goes back to what Damian mentioned about a lot of organizations have adopted the SaaS first product, which is awesome, because that means a lot of the responsibility of security is kind of handed over to a third party, which you just share a little bit of the risk, where you still get to have an advantage of a solution for you while managing the risk, while someone else is managing the risk for you. So I kind of feel it's kind of that order. And from a SaaS perspective, obviously you guys can check out Detection as well, since you're here. I've seen the product. I'm not saying it's a plug for it, but I think it's a good product to kind of go in and check out for SaaS. From a hybrid perspective, I definitely check out asset registers as well. I feel there is definitely like the CSPMs of the world. I'm actually in a debate today talking about why we need CSPMs, where it is still surprising that people still wonder why do I need a CSPM in this space. Is probably like another priority which I'll put into this space. So those two brackets, although the evolution of cloud has come in such a way that now you're kind of having CSPMs as well as SaaS being the two big pockets that people need to consider now. Hopefully that answers your question.
Cool.
Yes, it did.
Yeah. So this at modern workplaces, as we observed through talking to so many, we understand it's the business teams that procure and manage SaaS apps, not so much centrally by IT anymore. In fact, there is an interesting prediction from Gartner. By 2024, 70% of IT organizations will lack the relevant roles, skills, and tools to support SaaS-enabled digital transformation. Now, I don't know how true, but I would like to ask Damian, what challenges do you face at your workplace with the use of SaaS apps, if any?
It's a big question, and I could probably talk about that for hours, because I think there are challenges that come from different angles inside the workplace. So it's great that an organization is modern organizations adopt modern technology, but when you change technology trends, you also are faced with new challenges that you haven't been faced with before. And I think there's two sides of that coin. The first set of challenges are around security and governance, and the security due diligence of those SaaS tools, the security posture of those tools, and keeping abreast of that portfolio of tools, and how that posture is changing from tool to tool. And the other part within the organization, say within Culture Amp, there is the usability of different SaaS tools and the experience between a team that wants to use a SaaS tool and the configuration, the maintenance, and the upkeep of that tool. That, in my view, becomes the responsibility of that team. So when a team is asking, can we have SaaS tool X, they need to be in a position to be able to manage that from a functional perspective, because they're the business owners of that tool. IT shouldn't be owning that tool from a functionality point of view. So you need to make sure that that team knows what they're up against or up for when they adopt that tool. And the biggest challenge I've seen in the last decade with certainly the teams I've managed and other IT teams is SaaS has forced technology teams and technology functions to really think about their core purpose in an organization and what they can deliver in a digital world, because the roles and responsibilities of an IT team 10 years ago are very different now if you're managing a cloud-first organization. So for us at Culture Amp, I've tried to coach and build a team to be the trusted advisor within the organization, and to position ourselves more as technology consultants, so we can help encourage teams to focus on the right things. So some of the challenges we've been faced with is, making sure that there's a right focus on identity and access management. So I've spent portions of this year documenting and talking to a strategy around identity and access management and what that means and the importance of onboarding and offboarding and so forth. And the other part of that is integration between SaaS tools and data flow within all the different SaaS tools we have in the ecosystem. Where does our data sit? How do we manage data flows? Certain tools are sub-processes to our platform. Others have confidential information. So forming an integration strategy or an integration framework and giving teams guidance around how to connect these tools to help solve complex business problems. So rather than maintaining infrastructure and saying yes and no, you position yourself as a technology team to solve some of those newer and more complex challenges or business problems that have arisen as part of adopting new technology.
Can I ask the same question to Ashish? I mean, I understand PageUp, even though known to be a technology company, has been around for quite some time. Right? So has there been a SaaS-enabled digital transformation in your company, and what challenges do you face with that?
Sure. I think it's funny. When I was listening to Damian, it's a great point, and I totally concur with what he said as well, with the fact that if someone else is taking responsibility, they probably should look at GRC and the sub-processor components of it as well. From a PageUp perspective, it's been really interesting because PageUp has always been a tech-first company, and I probably compare it to some of the other technology companies where even though we have like the SaaS-first mentality, we've always gone, is this something that we can build? Because we definitely have like the right people around us. And I'm coming back from my previous experience. By the way, this is my second stint in PageUp. I was in PageUp 10 years ago. I came back again this time around. So I've seen it evolve over time. And I've also realized the fact that it's actually, there are two kinds of organizations that you come across. Like one who would look at something, a problem, and go, do I have the resources inside? And do I have the money to spend on this? And I'll build this. I may fail, but I'm going to try and build this first and then fail and come back. And then the other space or the spectrum, which I feel like it's always, I don't want to spend money on this because someone's already done this. And I would just want to go and buy this. So I think we've kind of feel, I've been in between this, where there have been obvious instances where we've gone, this is just too much of an effort for us to be focusing a lot of energy on. So we've gone ahead and kind of gone, okay, this is fine. We would just buy this as a SaaS software. Like I'll give you an example where we have, so Damian mentioned identity and access management. We have this, by default, we only have read-only access for all our cloud services. And we have this in-house software that we use to, I guess, elevate privileges. Everyone has to go through it. There's no other way around it. We developed it ourselves. And I'm sure, I don't even know if we actually checked there's a solution outside, but that's kind of where PageUp sits on it. So it's an interesting mix. So the balance for me is, I guess, managing it between a homegrown product versus a SaaS product. That's kind of where the challenges come in for me.
Ian, I guess you're coming from a different perspective as, you know, one of Australian giants. What are the challenges for you?
Look, I like what Damian was saying about the change in the role of IT. I mean, traditionally, IT professionals have been focused on providing the compute, the storage, the networking, and the layers, the stack of applications that reside on that, and focused on making sure of the availability and the capacity. And that shifts now that the business is empowered to select its own SaaS solutions. IT is cut out of that picture. But I still think that there is an important role for IT to play. IT needs to shift its focus and think of new ways of providing value to the business as a trusted advisor and consultant. So, for example, in a SaaS environment, your data is anywhere and everywhere. It's not neatly tucked away in your data center anymore. So I think that the IT can partner with the business to at least understand where that data is, and then provide the guidance to ensure that we're reducing the risks of things like data leakage, either accidentally or through unauthorized access through poor identity and access management practices. But also on top of that, understanding whether the data is being used ethically as well. So by being a trusted advisor and understanding the bigger picture, I think IT still has a role to play. As the business becomes more dependent and reliant upon software as a service solutions, Again, I think that the role of IT or risk professionals is to challenge the business and make sure that they understand and consider their business continuity practices. And this is especially important to a regulated entity like mine. We have to demonstrate that we understand the impact if a cloud service provider wasn't available, if they go out of business, or they have a major outage. We need to really work closely with the business and ensure that we can continue our operations in the absence of a SaaS service not being available for a short period of time or an extended period of time. And finally, I think that there's also an important role for IT to play with the business in helping optimize the cost and the efficiency, so that where we see and identify duplication, multiple subscriptions in SaaS solutions, we can guide the business to try and consolidate the licensing to enjoy benefits such as discounting.
So it seems like most of the challenges that all three of you just articulated would be considered pure security risks, particularly with SaaS. We're going to ask a couple of questions here on how you're managing these challenges. Ashish, in your two kinds of companies, I love your reference, by the way, that those that build first and those that buy first, where things that have been bought, how are you getting the level of privileged access oversight that you said that you've developed internally for the new bought systems? You're on mute, Ashish.
The rookie mistake, as always. Clearly, not enough Zoom meetings in my life to know how to unmute myself. With the solution that I've been bought, I think at the moment the way we've kind of gone around is with, as part of our compliance, we kind of regularly monitor it. That's how we've done it. Probably not. I think we're looking at improving it from a perspective of how do we do it automatically. As I mentioned, it's really shitty when you have to manage. I guess in an asset register is being managed by an Excel sheet, which is what I feel in a lot of organizations still happen. So I do feel it's a work in progress to make it automated. So I probably have a better answer when we get to that point, but at the moment it's through our regular monitoring is what we're doing it. So process and technology at the moment, that's kind of like, process and people is what's solving it, not technology.
Right, yep, the old triangle.
That's right.
Ian, you referenced, where is my data sitting when you were speaking just before. That seems like a fundamental question that needs to be answered, particularly in these days of data sovereignty. How do you think organizations will deal with this question and the risks that will come out of the answers for it in the future?
Cool. Is that for me?
No, that was for Ian.
No. Sorry. No, that's right.
That's a tough question. Oh gosh, I mean, do you know where your data is? I mean, that's a fundamental question. So, and at the moment, I mean, I'm afraid that the only way to really do that is manually by asking the question of your SaaS providers and taking it on good faith that they're telling you the truth, what country the data is in, so that you can understand whether there are any data sovereignty risks, who's got access to the information as well. So I'm not sure I've got the solution. I think that at the moment we just rely on the feedback we get when asking those questions of the SaaS platform providers.
And do you think that people, follow on from that, Ian, do you think that people, particularly regulated entities, will be required to start reporting on that stuff up to their regulators?
Depends on the regulator. Some regulators haven't enforced specific sovereignty rules and some have. So it really depends on the industry that you operate in and the country that you're operating in. For example, my main regulator, APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, has not mandated any constraints on data sovereignty yet. All they ask is that we assess and understand and manage the risks related to where our data may be, but they haven't put any prescriptive barriers on us placing our data offshore.
Okay, thank you. Damian, you used a word there that I think both the other two guys also followed up with, which was trusted advisor. Can you, I've got a two-part question for you. Can you give a little bit of details how you implemented that? And the second question is, you mentioned a lot of processes being implemented. Did either of these cause an uplift in governance, cause conflict with your culture first motto of Culture Amp?
So it's caused a little bit of conflict, but I wouldn't say it's amplified conflict. The trusted advisor component, we came up with that by so when I came into the business at the start of 2019, the first thing I did with the team was pull them away from the business and ask the fundamental question of who are we and what do we do? We need to be able to tell a story to the business as to why we're here and the services we provide. And one of the key themes that came out of that conversation with everyone in IT was that, we want to be a trusted advisor. We want people to come to us and trust us and have a conversation with us about what they want to do from a technical perspective. So that was kind of self-driven in the team. And we literally wrote that into a purpose statement and a mission statement about what the technology team stands for at Culture Amp. And once we were settled on that, we went on a bit of a PR campaign globally inside the company to actually advertise a new purpose and a new direction. And that kind of straightened us up a little bit, because then when we went to go talk with teams and when people came to us, it started to paint a new picture of where technology sits in that conversation. In order to really execute on that successfully, we just don't talk about technology in the conversation. We want to understand the business context and actually understand what it is that the team is trying to achieve, or that function is trying to achieve, before getting into solution mode. And as technologists, we're all guilty of jumping into solution mode really, really quickly to solve a problem. So we built some processes around that and to help drive a consultative engagement and help to drive an intuitive conversation that goes both ways. We had built, based on lean philosophy and agile philosophy, we had built a project management kickoff process where we have a one-pager that talks to the scope, the current state, the desired state, perceived risks, data classification, and we use that as an artifact for every project. And the team is responsible for filling that in, and we are the consultants that advise teams kind of how to fill that in, how to kind of plan, and that creates visibility, a central log, and a really intuitive conversation around what needs to happen in order to onboard new technology. Some teams are really, really prepared and have some of their own artifacts and they're ready to go. But that's about 10%. Everybody else needs a bit of assistance. And when you go through that process, we can start to understand how far we need to lean in as a technology advisor, or how far we need to lean back with certain initiatives.
So just to follow up on that, Damian, I mean, I've seen you shared some of your processes and guidelines. They're fantastic. Well, for those that have attended, that came in late, Damian is a technical advisory board member of Detexian as well. If you don't mind sharing, I mean, it's an evolution for you as well. Are there some gaps in your processes and procedures that you think, could be bridged, and how critical are they for you?
Yeah, and it's funny because I think Ian spoke to this a little bit earlier in our conversation. I think we've done a lot of work around initial assessments, vendor due diligence, and breaking off due diligence based on data classifications. One of the key questions we ask up front is what type of data is going to be stored in the SaaS tool? And based on where that sits with our data classification policy, that'll warrant how much due diligence we actually do. Because if restricted data is going to be stored in a system, we're going to run that through a huge process versus something that's going to have internal data that may not be as confidential or as risky. So we won't ask as many questions. And we've kind of, that's a commoditized service now, but that's a static process. And then after you implement the tool, then there's all sorts of changes that happen based on the vendor, their product roadmap. So the gaps we have today is, so let me break it in two parts. The global SaaS tools that all of Culture Amp uses, the IT team is responsible for those tools. and there's a subset. There's about 13 SaaS tools that everyone uses as part of being a culture amp. So technology is fully responsible for functionality, integration, implementation, everything for those global tools. But all the team-specific SaaS tools, there's a gap horizontally across those because we can't keep up with 100 different SaaS tools, different product roadmaps, and so forth. So we're looking at some tooling and some different technology now to help us with that observability. Shadow IT is a term that most people are probably aware of. We're looking at a CASB product, not right now, but that's something that we're looking at down the track, and also with Detexian as well, with some work around privileged access and automating the process we have around auditing and compliance that we do once a quarter with our security team, because they're all manual processes today. Because we're looking at scaling and growing aggressively in 2021, we need to automate some of those processes and make sure we have the right information available so we can observe and based on those results, either act or report to executives, our executives, around what we're observing, what we're seeing.
Yeah.
So if that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm not gonna ask the same questions to Ashish, because I think probably more or less the culture and experiences transpires into PageUp as well as an organization. I'm interested in Ian's perspective when it comes to gaps that he sees in his organization or his related, subsidiaries and vendors and suppliers. Are there any gaps that you would like to close?
Absolutely. There's always opportunity to improve things. So with our SaaS platforms, the question that plagues me is, has it been configured correctly? Is it really truly in a secure state? Or is there further work that can be done to improve it? Some SaaS solutions have quite rich security models. So there's lots of features that can be enabled and often aren't. Even just simple things like turning multi-factor authentication on. And at least having a single pane of glass that can interrogate using APIs and pull that data back as a discovery method is fantastic. So your traditional vulnerability scanning tools they don't do this. They're really good at scanning for weaknesses in traditional IT assets. But this is a growing gap for us, is being able to interrogate the security configuration of SaaS platforms and identify opportunities for hardening. And then from an ongoing lifecycle point of view, being able to detect drift or growing weaknesses, for example, excessive or inappropriate access and permissions, or being able to get real-time alerting of a risky change that has been made in a SaaS platform accidentally or deliberately that may leave it exposed. So for me, it's really about extending the concept of things like SIEM, security incident and event monitoring, to our SaaS real estate as well, and being able to get that data back in a meaningful and insightful way so that we can take action to manage the risks appropriately. So those are the gaps for me.
Thank you. Maybe that's a good segue for Detexian to talk a little bit about ourselves. As more businesses adopt SaaS, it's harder to keep track of security. And what we've seen is the blind spots are particularly pronounced among SaaS-powered small and medium enterprises. Common questions that are difficult to answer at any point in time are who's got access to which apps, with what level of privileges, are users logging in securely with MFA or single sign-on? And then there are unknowns around the presence of sensitive data and if it is flowing out of the organization. And Detexian is the solution to address these questions at any point in time. Adrian, can you flip to the next slide? We address these questions at any point in time across all major business apps, such as Office 365, G Suite, Atlassian, Salesforce, and the like. We audit SaaS access permissions and detect critical user misconfigurations. It means that Detexian helps you stay on top of SaaS security and makes regulatory compliance easy. You can generate audit reports to demonstrate evidence of control effectiveness over time. that your auditors or your customers want. Next slide, please. We currently offer a 28-day free trial, during which you get an executive report. It will give you an honest and holistic view of the security posture of your SaaS footprint, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you have access to a continuous oversight portal to delve into detail of all the exceptions and changes, such as privileged access drift that Ian just mentioned, unsecured authentication and external sharing to unauthorized parties. And the free trial will be a good baseline builder from which you can prioritize security improvement works accordingly. I'm just gonna ask a cheeky question, I guess, back to the panelists. How do you think Detexian could help you close some of the gaps? Ian, could we start with you?
Sorry, can you just cover that again?
Yeah, from the description above, how do you think Detexian could help you close some of the gaps that you mentioned earlier? Yeah, sorry.
Look, I think that it gives us the visibility, a uniform view of the risk posture. So, and I'm after agility and simplicity. As I sort of explain, every SaaS solution has its own models and it's nuanced. And it takes time to learn where to look on some of these platforms. On some of them, it's really easy. There might be a very simple administrative function. On some of them, it can be quite deep and quite rich. And I and my team don't really have the time to learn about that for every single platform. I need to get a normalized view. So I need to be able to get a single pane that shows me the posture of the different SaaS platforms, but also gives me the actionable insights, what to do next. Become my trusted advisor, give the advice on, well, where are the opportunities to fix it? And I think Detection's on the right path with this. This is an area that is still evolving and developing. So being able to, I suppose, become that Rosetta Stone, that universal translator that can give me a uniform view of my risk environment and show me where the problems are, so that myself and my team can get onto it and help the business get it fixed, would be awesome.
Thank you. Damian, we are doing a POC with you, so it's an honor for us to have you as our advisor, but also helping your company. You mentioned privileged access. Maybe can you share how you did privileged access audit previously and how Detexian is helping you?
Yeah, sure. So privileged access is obviously something that is very, very important to Culture Amp across all our systems, not just our tier 1 and our 2 critical systems. So it's been a very manual, laborious process traditionally for the security team to literally build out a spreadsheet of all our SaaS tools, figure out who the owners are, or go to the asset management system, try and look up the owners, and then go to talk to those people, talk to IT about privilege access, then review, do they need it? Why do they have it? And that has taken days on end to do. So that was one of the first use cases that I thought where Detexian could help us, because that's an example of digitizing a process and then getting accurate data back. So you can have not just hypothetical conversations about risk management, but having a legitimate conversation about risk management, because you've got the data there to tell you what's changed, who's got privileged access, how long have they had it, why do they have it, or it doesn't match to the role-based access we're doing with identity management, or wanting to mature in that space. So that's the first piece. But also to Ian's point before, with our identity and access management strategy, we're making it mandatory to have MFA on all our tier 1 and tier 2 SaaS tools. And we have that enabled for a lot of our tools already, but actually mandating it and making sure that is in fact implemented. So Detexian helps us get that data in a single pane view, and we can have data-driven decisions with our CTO and co-founder, and with exec, and being a member of our risk committee, bringing that data to the risk committee and saying, as part of our adoption with technology, here is the trade-offs, here is what's happening in the environment. So I think that's where Detexian can really help us.
Thank you, Damian. Ashish, have you got a view there? Oh, you're on mute again.
Jesus. Oh my God. I think I need to practice like mute and mute. I need like one of those panel things. But I was saying, I wish I could copy paste what Ian and Damian have mentioned, because I feel like that's definitely a sweet spot for where I personally, I think I gave a shout out to detection earlier as well, because I definitely feel it's an interesting space which is growing. And I also feel to Damian's point about global versus individual teams, like I think both having global teams makes it really interesting, but where what SaaS service is being used in your home turf versus say globally. So I think definitely detection can help at least centralize that visibility from that perspective.
Thank you. Now I think it's time to open up the floor for Q&A.
We've had a lot of questions actually. TJ asked an excellent one in chat, which Damian gave an excellent answer to, but unfortunately I don't think TJ can see the answer. So I'm going to actually read it out to you. So Damian, do you see a risk that in not having a centralized governance function within the organization? How much of this could be automated, and where does IT play a role in that? Do you want to just replay your answer there, Damian?
Yes, definitely. Sorry, I thought you said you were going to reread it, but
I was just reading the question. Sorry.
No, sorry. All good, all good. So my answer to that basically is I think there needs to be a central type of service looking at some of those things, absolutely, because the people that are consuming the tools in the business, that's not their core. That's not what they're there for, essentially. I think IT or security has an invested interest and an obligation to look at some of those things. So some of those sit inside of IT today at Culture Amp as part of reestablishing what we do. But to make that a success, we've had to partner, not had to, we've chosen to partner quite closely with our legal team and also our security team. So inside the corporate part of the business, we've got this triangle, I'll call it the triangle of love, between legal, IT, and security, where we're playing that trusted advisor role with some of these things, and I think that's really critical. As far as process is concerned, I think no matter what the process is or the subject matter, if it is a repetitive process that is identical the second or third time, there's an obligation to see if you can digitize and automate that. And inside of IT at Culture Amp, we have 3 teams essentially, but we have a team or a practice dedicated to technology adoption. And it's inside adoption where we look to try and automate process. So there are some things that we've done there. And I've just invited those, if anyone's interested in that stuff, they can DM me on LinkedIn and I can send some more info if they like.
Cool, thank you for that. Ian, when you were talking before about the data question, Joseph asked a question, which is, can't you just ask the service providers to show you the evidence? And what would you like to say to that?
I mean, sure, as part of the onboarding, the due diligence, it is a question that we do ask. We, as a standard question, we ask where the data is. But again, that's a point in time. So I think that if you are really concerned about what country or jurisdiction your data resides in, you also need to consider future-proofing the terms and conditions on the contracts to ensure that the timely notification, if that's ever going to change. I think that you also need to just check with your SaaS or your cloud provider what their contingency plans are around service continuity and disaster recovery, because you'll sometimes be surprised and discover that their continuity plan does sometimes entail shifting and having the data operate out of a different jurisdiction. So the fact is that with SaaS solution providers, sometimes your only control is contractual. So building it into the terms and conditions to make sure that you're at least told of a change so that you can then make your own risk-based decision.
Yep, great, thank you. Ashish, we've had a couple of questions come in around your asset register type things. And you mentioned there about a lot of people using Excel spreadsheet, which doesn't surprise me. So when you say you can't protect what you can't see, what tools would you recommend for updating asset registers and keeping them up to date?
I guess it depends. The honest answer to this is actually I'm still, so because we have, I guess if we kind of look at any current technology landscape at the moment, the two groups that I was talking about, we technically have three. We have an on-premise world, we have a cloud, potentially a multi-cloud world, and a SaaS world. And you can, as you can imagine, assets between all three of those pockets would be really varied. Some of them can be super digital with a SaaS provider or a cloud provider. But some of the on-premise ones, you're looking at, oh, I don't even know where to start, especially if you talk about operational technology elements like an IoT device or something. So the solution that I've gone forward with is I'm making my own. In the true spirit of either build first or buy first, we're making our own asset register solution. And the only reason for this is we did look outside. I did try looking for what's a good asset register solution that goes across the board. And what I ended up with is for me to have, I'm going to steal Damian's word over here for observability. We have an observability project that's ongoing, but I think it's almost like, so because I've been doing cloud migration for 6 years now, and I find that there has been like a migration from CASBs to CSPMs, and now the next evolution of CSPM is security observability. How do you do observability using security? And that's kind of what I've been kind of trying to build on, because AWS has come out and said they're going to support it. So for me at the moment, from a cloud perspective, that's what it is. From a SaaS perspective, I think it'll be possibly something like Detection. That probably would be a great asset register from that perspective. And to Ian's point, it's really hard for you to keep across the various security policies or controls that you have across the board, especially if you're talking more than 5 SaaS. I mean, we've intentionally had a very small pool of SaaS services for that exact same problem. That's why we go with the people and process part for the moment. But if we have a lot of SaaS services, I mean, I'm totally with Ian. It's like you kind of need something like a Detection to kind of go and maintain that centrally, so you don't have to think about what do I need to think about from Office 365 or Salesforce or something else.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you, Ashish, for that. Ian, the next question I have is for you. This one's a doozy. For SaaS-powered businesses selling products and services to regulated entities, but can't afford to spend the big bucks on security of investments or external assurance, what would your advice be to them?
Oh gosh, yeah, I have to do this all the time. So I mean, I basically, coming back to what Damian said earlier, it's not a one-size-fits-all model when looking at the security hygiene of your SaaS provider. So with a regulated entity, the thing that we do is we do go through a categorization process where we try to understand just how sensitive the information is that we might be sharing or storing on a SaaS platform, and also how critical that SaaS platform may be or may become for us. So we're basically doing some risk profiling, and that helps define what are the security qualities or the security features and capabilities that we'll be looking for. So we also appreciate that it's not a one-size-fits-all with the maturity and the coverage. But in general, we will be looking for some really basic capabilities like the enablement of things like multi-factor authentication. We do look to see whether there are any reasonable controls in place to detect or block threats. So we'll be asking questions of the SaaS platform providers or a SaaS-powered business around how they are managing their risks. What are they doing to manage the vulnerabilities of their information? What are they doing to maintain the continuity of their business? So a SaaS-powered business that's heavily reliant on a range of SaaS platform providers, we will ask, well, what happens if one of them fails? Are you able to continue operations, or is that going to have a consequential impact on us? So we basically are looking for the soundness of their risk management and their business operations, because their risk is our risk.
I've got some questions for Damian coming up here, which is, one is about culture, the other is about around responsibility. So a lot of people, when they think of cloud security, they think of app stack security. So whose responsibility is it in your opinion, in an organization to look after corporate data security?
I was just unmuting. Corporate data security. So I don't think it sits in one specific team, and I think that answer is different for every organization. In a context of Culture Amp, I have put some of that responsibility on IT, particularly for the global SaaS tools. I think, again, I use the word obligation, but I think we'll be negligent in our duty as a technology advisor to not have a look, to not play a role in where data is sitting from a corporate data, where it's sitting, and what the surface attack area is, because the ecosystem for Culture Amp is over 100 SaaS tools. So I think technology plays a part of that responsibility, and legal and security do as well, particularly when you're negotiating a contract, you're onboarding a tool, and you're getting it through the door and you're following that process, much to some of the processes that I understand that Ian's team goes through as well in his organization. But the bigger challenge with responsibility is making sure that the team that you're talking to, when they advise you through the process to say, oh, we're going to put this type of data in the system, that they've got an obligation to make sure that if their process changes or their ways of working change, which has an impact on the type of data that they start entering that system, then they need to come and talk with technology again, or they need to talk with security or legal and say, hey, we've had this tool now for 6 months. We're now cross-functionally working with team Z. We're now putting confidential data in here. Now, a lot of teams won't think that way. They'll just keep working and plowing ahead. So I think the initial responsibility on IT as part of that engagement is to make this very clear to teams, to say that if you're going to change how you're using this tool and the data input changes, you just need to come and let us know.
Sure, thank you. We have 2 minutes for the last question, I guess to Ashish. How do you provide assurance across platforms to your customers?
That's a good question. I think a lot of times, and this kind of goes back to a question that was asked to Ian about how do you validate that you do the right thing by being a product company, or especially if you're either SaaS first or if you're being quite, I guess, build first. A lot of times the answer has been through external auditors like certifications and pen testing. That's kind of has been something that's worked. That's kind of what has been worked for our customers, where they as part of their due diligence upon us, we make sure we continue to keep our ISO 27001. We have a bug bounty program, which is responsible disclosure, is online on the PageUp website as well. And we as an organization, we definitely have security first mindset, and we've tried to be as public as possible about it as well. And hence, for more and more reason, I'm actually here talking about security in PageUp. Was that the context of the question that you were asking?
Thank you. I think that's it for our webinar today. We've been so honored to have received such a good reception. So to thank everybody for your attendance, we'll send you a complimentary SaaS security guideline by email. So don't forget to register for the free 28-day trial. And if you have further questions, just contact us. Our next webinar will be organized in December. Please look out for the invite. Again, thank you, panelists. You were awesome today, and we appreciate that you shared your experience. Apologies for those attendees that came late and didn't get the link previously. We'll take that feedback on board and improve that for the next one. Before you leave, please fill out the exit poll to help us improve the experience for you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great hosting, everyone. Thanks for the panel as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
See ya. See ya.
Thanks.
Thanks.